Babe, wake up. The new Riley Sager novel just dropped. Hello and welcome back. My name is Caitlin and I love to read. And whenever I feel like I'm in a reading rut, I always reach for a thriller to get me out of my slump. Riley Sager is this psychological mystery slash thriller author who always writes very engrossing, fast-paced novels that are riddled with twists. I like his books because when I pick up a thriller, I just want to be sucked in. I want something that is a page turner that will leave me a little bit spooked, but not like permanently traumatized. I don't want to have to sleep with the lights on, you know? Now, although he doesn't include anything that I find to be too grotesque or horrible, he always pays kind of homage to these classic horror themes. Each of his books relies on a popular setting or storyline that we see in classic scary movies. Are we at summer camp? Is it a haunted house? Are there satanic cults nearby? And has there been a slasher-style murder? I also love that because there are so many twists in the book, I'm always surprised in one way or another. Yes, of course there are some low-hanging fruits, but usually the big reveals at the end are executed very well. Riley Sager has released a novel every single year since his first one in 2017, and as soon as I see that there is a new book coming out by him, it's always an automatic read for me. When I heard that he was releasing his new novel, Middle of the Night, this June, I got on my library's waitlist through the Libby app, and I was one of the first to receive a copy. Today I'm going to rank all of the Riley Sager novels from my least favorite to my most favorite of his works. Now, this is just a personal preference. I really feel like we're all gonna have very different opinions about his books because we all have different flavors of scary stories that tickle our spooky bone. Let's get into it. So the first book I want to talk about is Survive the Night, and this is my resounding least favorite work of Riley Sager's. It is set in the 90s and follows our female protagonist Charlie, who is a college student trying to get home to Ohio. There's a campus killer that's been going around stabbing young women, and Charlie's best friend slash roommate Maddie was murdered. She wants to leave campus and spend some time at home to grieve, and because it's the 90s, she winds up posting a flyer on an ad board looking for a rideshare. So she meets Josh through her ad, and he offers to drive her home. So she packs up her stuff, she says goodbye to her boyfriend, and she gets into the car for a very long car ride with a stranger while there is a serial killer on the loose. So this is where I knew a man was writing the female protagonist, because there is no reality in which a woman would put herself in harm's way like this when she is the exact demographic of a serial killer's type. It's just beyond stupid. Charlie is also an unreliable narrator. She's obsessed with movies and finds herself often zoning out and creating these movie-like events in her head that don't really happen. So anyway, Charlie and Josh embark on this very long car ride together, and very soon after they get into the car, Charlie finds out that Josh has some inconsistencies within his story, and she starts to wonder, is she in the car with the campus killer? But this internal monologue was so frustrating. She's so back and forth with herself about this, whether he's the killer or whether he's not the killer, and she's being crazy. It was giving me whiplash. They journey through these expansive, dimly lit, remote streets, and this poses the question, will Charlie survive the night? I would probably give this book a skip. I just thought that Charlie was the dumbest female main character I've ever read in a thriller novel, and it was really hard to resonate with the bad decisions that she was making. There were so many instances where she could have gotten herself out of this road trip from hell, but she just decided to see how it played out, even though her life was at stake. Charlie's motives were unbelievable, and I also thought that the plot twists themselves were pretty unbelievable. Now, the movie versus real life like events that were going on in her head were very gimmicky in my opinion, and I thought were kind of a cop-out. So all in all, this is my least favorite of his works. So second to last, I'm putting his new book, Middle of the Night, which is kind of a letdown. I was so looking forward to reading this. I just felt it to be very boring and probably the hardest book to get through in my opinion. Now, this is Riley Sager's first novel that follows a male main character whose name is Ethan Marsh. He finds himself back in his childhood home in his 40s in a cul-de-sac called Hemlock Circle. While the street might seem like the American suburban ideal, it's got white picket fences, beautiful yards, neighbors who have been there for generations, it's actually haunted by a very dark past. When Ethan was 10 years old, him and his next door neighbor slash best friend Billy were camping out in Ethan's backyard. When Ethan woke up the next day, there was a huge gash in the tent and Billy was gone. Nobody ever found him. Ethan remembers nothing from that night except for the sound of the tent splitting. This has caused him to be so weighed down with guilt and with grief throughout his adolescence and adult life. He tried hypnotherapy, he's been seeing a psychotherapist for a long time, and it's led him to develop this uncurable bout of insomnia. Especially now that he's back in his folks' home, he feels like all these memories are stirred up and he cannot sleep in the middle of the night. Sometimes he feels like he's surrounded by Billy's presence. He starts to investigate the night of the disappearance more, and he wonders if his neighbors are as innocent as they seem. Now, while he's doing some digging, he finds that an institution that is very close by was once the home to a cult. Coincidence? To me, there just seems like there is so much repetition in this book. It made it feel like it was moving at a glacial pace. At one point, Ethan installs like a camera, like a trail cam, on the back of a tree in his backyard because he believes that either Billy's ghost is visiting him at night or somebody's playing a cruel prank on him. But basically, he just gets notifications on his phone constantly and he's like, oh my gosh, is it Billy's ghost? Ugh, it's just a squirrel. Is it Billy's ghost? Ugh, it's a deer. A squirrel again. A bird. And it gets so old so fast. And so as he's investigating these clues that he finds, as more information comes to light, it leads him on this really roundabout investigation. And by the time we actually have the big reveal, it is such a letdown. It was not deserved. It was not satisfying. I was disappointed with it. If you're a big Riley Sager fan like I am, I would love to hear your thoughts if you read this book, if you think it's one of his stronger novels or where you find that it falls in your lineup. Next up is House Across the Lake. Casey Fletcher is our protagonist, and she is a woman who comes from a very famous family. After Casey's husband dies suddenly, she starts to have this drinking problem that spirals, and she finds herself in the midst of a big paparazzi faux pas. To get out of the spotlight, she visits her family's secluded lake house in Vermont, and instead of getting help with her drinking problem, she just spends all day guzzling booze and spying on her neighbors with a pair of binoculars. Her favorite people to watch are a seemingly perfect couple. Catherine Royce is a former model. She's still beautiful, she's glamorous, and her husband Tom is handsome, he's successful, and the two of them seem lovely. One day, as Casey's spying, she sees Catherine appear to be drowning. So she goes over, she saves her, and the two strike up a fast friendship. But the more that Casey watches Catherine from afar and gets to know Catherine up close as friends, the more she wonders if their marriage may not be as perfect as it seems. She starts to spy more, to speculate more, and simultaneously drink enough to rival an entire frat house. And at the same time, Catherine disappears. Casey becomes consumed with trying to figure out what happened to her new friend. I liked this book in the sense that I did not see the plot reveals coming. Although it was a little out of left field and very unbelievable overall, I still enjoyed the book. I'm just not crazy about the trope of a very drunk woman who's an unreliable narrator solving the crime. It's very much reminiscent of The Woman in the Window versus Behind Her Eyes. I feel like this book was Riley Sager taking a risk and deviating from his normal formula, and while I can't fault him for that, while I did not dislike it, it just didn't seem to work out totally in his favor, so it ranks pretty middle of the road for me. Okay, let's talk about Final Girls, and Final Girls was a fun one. I know it's a lot of people's favorite book of Riley Sager's, and it's actually the first one he released. For me, it's kind of middle of the road as well. It's absolutely gripping, and if you have not read this one, I would recommend picking it up. So Quincy Carpenter is our leading lady in this novel, and she decides to go on this trip in the middle of the woods with some other co-eds for a weekend away. A killer stumbled upon the cabin, and she became the lone survivor of a slasher-style massacre. Now, the paparazzi branded her as part of this Final Girls Club, which includes two other women who were lone survivors in big mass murders. Lisa was the only one in her sorority house to survive a killing spree, and Sam was working at a motel where she ran into the sack man who was killing everybody there. And although these three had never met in real life, they were always grouped together in the public eye. I really like how this takes the final girl trope and just turns it on its head. What is it like for any final girl once the camera has stopped rolling and the action is over? What does her life look like once all the dust is settled? Well, 10 years later, we see Quincy, who is actually living a pretty normal life. She's got a loving fiance, a small business, and she still keeps in touch with the cop who saved her all those years ago. She just seems pretty healthy overall, even though she really likes Xanax. But once she finds out that Lisa has been found in a bathtub with her wrist slit and Sam shows up at her door suspecting foul play, things kind of take a wild turn. I liked this book overall quite a lot. I just found it hard to come to terms with some of the decisions that our female main character was making. There's just this one point where Sam and Quincy like go to Central Park and beat up this homeless guy into a coma, and it's like really fucked up. So it's like, come on, if you are already in a super stressful situation, why are you adding this much more stress into your life? And because she also suffers with this like pseudo pill addiction, I just feel like, again, it's playing into that trope of this unreliable narrator because she's not always sober while she's doing these things. Not my favorite trope. So in third place, I have The Last Time I Lied. So this book is set in a summer camp called Camp Nightingale. I used to go to a sleepaway camp every summer as a kid, and it was the best. It was my favorite thing in summer, and I love a good thriller in a camp setting. There's nothing like it. As an aside, I remember being told this very scary story when I was a kid from my camp counselor. I must have been, I don't know, like 12 or 13 at the time. And she told me that her friend was a bartender in New York City and would get off at these crazy hours. So her friend gets to the subway station at like 3 in the morning where nobody else is around. It's too late for most like bar shifts to be closing, and it's too early for most people to be going into work. She gets in the subway car and there's only 3 people in it, and they are all slam packed together. It's 2 big guys and 1 little girl right in the middle. Now the guys are big and muscular and kind of shady looking, and they're looking at each other, at the walls, everywhere but my counselor's friend. But the girl in the middle was staring straight at her, and she would not stop. So my counselor's friend is trying to be cool. She's at the very opposite side, and she looks around, tries not to be awkward, but this girl is just staring at her. So she takes a closer look, and this girl looks kind of sick. She's got greenish skin, glassy eyes, and she is relentless with her looking. This makes the counselor's friend kind of worried, so she thinks she's gonna say something, and again, these people are all jam-packed together, so she's trying to catch the guy's eyes around the girl in the middle, and they won't look at her. So right then, the subway car stops, and this man walks in, and he takes a look right at the counselor's friend, and then he takes a look on the other side where the 3 people are hunched together really, really tight. And although the entire subway car is empty, he comes right next to the counselor's friend and sits directly next to her. And he leans in and he whispers in her ear, "Get off at the next stop." So this girl is freaked out and she does what he says. Now she gets off with this mystery man and she says, "Hey, listen, I've got 911 on my phone right now. You can have any of my money. I just don't want any trouble." And he said, "I don't want your money. I'm trying to help you." You see, those 2 men across from you were smuggling a dead body through the subway car. That little girl who's staring at you has been dead for at least a day. And they were getting jumpy. I was worried that they were going to kill you as well. And when I tell you that I did not sleep for days at summer camp, oh my God. I came home and I slept with the lights on for like 4 full days until my mom pulled me aside and she was like, "Caitlin, our electricity bill cannot take this. What is going on?" And so I spilled the details. I was like, "Mom, listen, I heard this horrible, scary story and I cannot sleep at night without thinking of this dead little girl looking me in the eyes with her green skin and her gross glazed eyes." And I told my mom this entire awful tale that was keeping me up at night. And she looks at me in the eyes and she's like, "Caitlin, this is one of the most famous scary stories in New York. This is not something that actually happened to your friend." And the betrayal, the trust issues I had, oh my God. Anyway, there's nothing like a spooky camp story that does it for me. So anyway, back to the book. This follows Emma Davis, who was a kid at summer camp and she showed up late, and so they wind up putting her with these very cool older girls in a cabin. One day she wakes up to 3 of her bunkmates sneaking out and they are never seen again. This experience haunts Emma, and as she grows up, she starts to channel her grief and her questions into art. So she paints these really creepy pieces with little girls in white gowns and like a tangle of forestry. She shows her work in a gallery in New York City, and she gets approached by the very wealthy Franny, who is in charge of Camp Nightingale, and she says, "Come on back and be the art instructor here and maybe we'll change your mind." So Emma tries to overcome her traumatic past and face it head on by becoming the art instructor at Camp Nightingale. And as she's there, she's surprised to find herself surrounded by familiar faces like her old camp crush. She tries to investigate the events of that summer and wants to figure out what happened to her friends on that night of the disappearance. This book is set in two timelines, so we've got the past and we've got the present, and I like the way it's layered, so it just kind of unravels in front of you. The mood in this book is very ominous and dark. It's a great summer read, and the twist at the end absolutely got me. It's been a while since I read this book, so I wonder if I reread it more recently if I would put it in my top 3, but this one lands 4th on my list. Okay, now the top 3. In 3rd place, I have The Only One Left. In 1929, a well-to-do family was brutally murdered in their big, spooky mansion in Maine, and there was only one survivor, 17-year-old Lenora Hope. While everyone suspects Lenora of murdering her family, the police could never prove it, so she never went to jail and she lived pretty much her whole life in the big mansion. She never really left it because she became a social pariah after that. Flash forward to 1983, we follow Kit McGreer. She's a home health aide who can't really land a job anymore because the last person she was helping died. However, the agency says that she can have one final chance to help with Lenora Hope as her aide because Lenora's last aide fled suddenly in the middle of the night. All these years later, Lenora is kind of a local legend still, and there is a nursery rhyme about the events that happened that night. Okay, I have it here. At 17, Lenora Hope hung her sister with a rope, stabbed her father with a knife, took her mother's happy life. It wasn't me, Lenora said, but she's the only one not dead. So Kit is pretty nervous to become the home health aide of this boogeyman, Lenora Hope. But once she actually gets there, she finds this very old woman who is confined to a wheelchair and can't really verbalize anything due to multiple strokes that she's had. But Kit finds she's able to communicate with Lenora via this old typewriter. And Lenora will type out messages to her, and Lenora tells her that she will tell her the truth. Creepy nursery rhyme? Check. Spooky isolated cliffside mansion? Check. Dark and twisty family secrets? Check. I thought Riley Sager knocked this one out of the park. The unsettling atmosphere was amazing. I loved the Hope Mansion as the setting for this book. There were some reveals that were so big of a coincidence that I had to really suspend my disbelief, but overall everything came together with a nice little bow on top, and I finished it in one sitting. For number 2, I have Lock Every Door. I love this book. I think that this was the first Riley Sager novel that I read, and I've reread it at least once since it dropped in 2019. Jules is our female main character, and she is very much down on her luck. She's going through a breakup, so she loses her living situation, and she doesn't really have a stable job, so she winds up sleeping at her friend's house on her couch and is having a really hard time adjusting to her living situation. So she starts looking at ads to become an apartment sitter, and she gets interviewed for a very special job. This gig would be an absolute dream come true for her. It's a 3-month stint at one of New York City's most high-profile and mysterious buildings called the Bartholomew. It's painted as this very gothic high-rise building that is bourgeoisie to the max. So Jules will be able to stay at this beautiful apartment building for 3 months and get paid $12,000 to do it. For her, this is a godsend, this is a dream, but when things seem too good to be true, they usually are. There are some very odd rules that come along with the position. She's not allowed to have visitors, she's not allowed to spend a single night away from the apartment, and she is absolutely not allowed to interact with any of the other guests at the apartment building who are rich or famous or a combination thereof. Jules does accept the position because it's amazing, and she winds up getting another apartment sitter there named Ingrid. Ingrid warns Jules that the Bartholomew is haunted, that it's got a very dark past, and that not all is as it seems. Jules initially brushes this off as kind of a conspiracy, but the next day Ingrid goes missing. As Jules starts to dig into her friend's disappearance and the history of the apartment building, she uncovers some pretty dark secrets. I love how chilling and atmospheric this book is in a very gothic, old money, urban setting. The way that this was paced and the reveals were excellent. This book gets some pretty mixed reviews, and I know it won't be everyone's cup of tea, but for me, it's one of my favorite thrillers. And so finally, we've got my favorite Riley Sager book of all time, Home Before Dark. I think this is Riley Sager's absolute best work. It is so spooky and so addictive. I just couldn't put it down. I finished the whole thing in one sitting, and I would absolutely recommend it to anybody who loves things that go bump in the night. In this book, we follow Maggie Holt, who was just 5 years old when she moved into Bainbury Hall with her parents. She lived there for a whopping 20 days and has almost no memories of it except for fleeing with her parents in the middle of the night. Her and her parents never returned to the property. Now, after they left, her father went on to write a nonfiction novel called House of Horrors, where he recounted all of the ghostly events they experienced and all of their encounters with malevolent spirits during their stay at the house. This book became an overnight success as well as a worldwide phenomenon. Think like Amityville Horror, and it amassed fame as well as skepticism for the family. As an adult, Maggie's parents pass away and she suddenly inherits Bainbury Hall. Maggie is now a home renovator, and so she hopes to flip this house and sell it for profit and just rid herself of it for good. While she does not remember anything about her time there as a kid, she read her father's story and doesn't believe a word of it. I love the way that we get her perspective as an adult, fixing up the house and uncovering secrets, and the book alternates with chapters from her dad's novel House of Horrors. It just creates this very ominous and creepy atmosphere and makes you wonder what's real and what's made up. And oh my god, do I love a good ghost story and I love a good haunted house? Yes, and this book does them both absolutely right. As Maggie meets some standoffish locals and tears the house down for renovations, some chilling occurrences start to unfold. She has to ask herself, does she really believe in ghosts, or is her past haunted by something else entirely? And that's it. Thank you guys so much for watching my video. I would love to hear your opinion on Riley Sager novels and if you like them / what you would rank them as. I had so much fun making this video. I hope you guys had fun watching it, and if you did, please subscribe and I will see you soon.